Ambazonians pledge our loyalty. Praise the soul of Savior who granted us the freedom. Our legends to the hero who bowed the land with Diablo. Glory to glory, we rise and never to fall. Here in our nation, flowing with earth and holy. Glory, glory, glory to the Father for making you a nation, a joy forevermore. Ambazonia, land of freedom, you shall live in plenty, meeting our need. And your children shall be like the stars above. The Most High God being the watchman of this nation. Ambazonia, land of freedom, you shall live in plenty, meeting our need. And your children shall be like the stars above. The Most High God being the watchman of this nation. Hail this land of glory, we the Ambazonians pledge our loyalty. Praise the soul of Savior who granted us the freedom. Our legends to the hero who bowed the land with Diablo. Glory to glory, we rise and never to fall. Here in our nation, flowing with earth and holy. Glory, glory, glory to the Father for making you a nation, a joy forevermore. Ambazonia, land of freedom.
It's okay, I have a lot of questions asked for because
Hail this land of glory, we the Ambazonians pledge our loyalty. Praise the soul of Savior who granted us the freedom. Our legends to the hero who bowed the land with Diablo. Glory to glory, we rise and never to fall. Here in our nation, flowing with earth and holy. Glory, glory, glory to the Father for making you a nation, a joy forevermore. Ambazonia, land of freedom.
Newspapers headlines today that they
Hail this land of glory, we the Ambazonians pledge our loyalty. Praise the soul of Savior who granted us the freedom. Our legends to the hero who bowed the land with Diablo. Glory to glory, we rise and never to fall. Here in our nation, flowing with earth and holy. Glory, glory, glory to the Father for making you a nation, a joy forevermore.
Things we can issue such a document then it is deceiving itself. First of all, what is characterized as secession, which is not very case, is not a crime under international law. And therefore, you cannot have an international warrant issued for the arrest of individuals supposedly guilty of secession. Take it a bit further. That is the domestic law of French Cameroon. Secession is an offense. It is not competent of the Refugee Cameroon other countries that warrant. For a simple reason, no one country is the policeman of another country to enforce the criminal law of another country. It doesn't happen. That is not part of international law. So if they have been advised by their own local lawyers to do that, I think they must receive wrong advice. I think what is simply happening here is simply an act. We know that there are multiple applications that have been filed at the International Criminal Court against the president of that country and others most criminally responsible for genocide and crimes against humanity in the former British Trust Territory of the Southern Cameroons, which has since been renamed Ambazonia. Now, there is real prospect that these individuals will be arrested and tried in that court. And especially people from Mr. Bia's ethnic tribe or group have been expressing a lot of concern and worry about that prospect. Because the people include not only politicians, but also military officers from there, and a number of civil servants as well, who have cooperated, aided and abetted the commission of those crimes. So in order to placate that constituency, to give them a feeling that probably is not true, they set up a tribal newspaper, fund it, and ask it to publish this kind of rubbish. And in doing that, they are hoping that they can divert attention from what is awaiting them very, very soon. I'll encourage everybody just to ignore that. La République du Cameroon or French Cameroon has no power beyond the territory it controls. And I do not see any country enforcing any such stupid warrant. And in the first place, as a state, as a country, La République du Cameroon or French Cameroon cannot issue the so-called international warrant of arrest. I will advise them instead to reserve any such warrant for those of his people guilty of embezzlement, human trafficking, drug dealing, money laundering, and a number of other crimes. So that is no big deal. I mean, just ignore it and we'll proceed.
Well, indeed, Prof, like you have clearly put it, clearly the Beti clan, there is need for appeasement in the Beti clan, and apparently to put out a newspaper report that an international warrant has been issued for separatists, it suits the pain. It makes them feel better about it, and also, you know, it makes the clique feels better. And I mean, like a law professor, I think you're talking from a law background. La Republic does not have those grounds to issue an international warrant. Plus the fact that our government now is pursuing a case with the ICC so that specific individuals in La Republic be charged for crimes against humanity, which we have collected quite some evidence over the past year on that alone, and over the past years, because in the 90s the same things happened, and there's a lot of evidence backing from the 90s right up till today. But this year especially, we've collected like double that evidence of crimes, personal crimes against humanity. Then before we start looking at economic crimes, these people have looted our country for 55 years without paying royalties and all those type of things. So, Prof, when I get you, I'm usually excited, and I want to go back to probably our very first meeting when you educated me on this whole thing. And fellow viewers, please don't get upset. I want us to connect the dots with Prof. It's very interesting when he connects the dots from the very beginning. Then you will get a better understanding of where we stand and where we are going. So I would like to take Prof way back from the beginning. It's going to be exciting. Don't be boring. We are going to talk about all the hot issues that are happening today, this week, and obviously this month, like what is happening, what is going to be happening next and all that. But I want to go back way from the beginning. Prof, 1953, we left Nigeria. 1954, we started our government in Boya. This is a fact that La Republique wish that never ever existed.
Yes.
Just run us between that time when we left Nigeria and till we left Nigeria to Boya, governed ourselves as a country, right up to 61, where we became part of La Republique. Just give us a summary background on that. And this is important, viewers. I'm not taking you back. We need to build something here and get some context.
I think it's very important for our people to understand where we're coming from, so as to also know exactly where we're going to. As a trust territory that the UN gave to the United Kingdom to administer, the United Kingdom, in its own infinite wisdom, decided to administer us for what they call administrative convenience with its neighboring territory of Nigeria. So, right from the League of Nations mandate that was given to the UK, 1922. In 1923, the UK government make a decision in terms of which we are administered as part of Nigeria. And now the legal phraseology is as if we were part of Nigeria. Now that was the reason for using that as if was because the United Nations, the League of Nations United, kept on insisting that the identity of the territory must not be lost. So Britain said, no, it's administered with Nigeria, but as if it was part of Nigeria. And so the Southern Cameroon found itself not administered, as it ought to have been the case, directly from London, but not even from Lagos, but from Enugu in Nigeria. Very curious situation. A third-rate system of administration, not from the UK in London, not even from Lagos, which is the capital of Nigeria, but from Enugu, which is the capital of Eastern Nigeria. In other words, we're considered as if we're part of the Eastern region of Nigeria. And that's how our people found themselves in that Eastern region House of Assembly. And for a long time, and of course, naturally, much of the happenings in that Eastern region were about Nigerian issues. Southern Cameroon issues did not hardly ever came up because the Southern Cameroon was considered more or less like a backwater of developments in Nigeria. And in view of this, what people saw that the continued association of Nigeria in that particular context was never going to advance us at all. We're going to remain an underdeveloped region and a people that will continue to suffer from underdevelopment. And they took that decision in 1953 when the crisis in the Eastern region blew up. There was their own internal fighting the assembly and who has to be leader and so on. Our leaders declared what they call benevolent neutrality in Nigerian politics. In other words, we are not going to get involved in Nigerian politics because we are not Nigerians to begin with. And so they stayed apart. And in 1953, they insisted that they must have a government in Boya with their own legislature. And the British granted that wish. So our people left Nigeria, and in 1954, they inaugurated the Southern Cameroon House of Assembly and a government. Of course, our first premier was Dr. E.M.L. Endeli. He had a task, something like what we are seeing today with the interim government, trying to lay the foundation, the solid foundation for the Southern Cameroon. There was no government in the Southern Cameroon before. There was no assembly. And he had that unenviable task of seeing that we had a government there, setting up government ministries, setting up parliaments, having an election, have people represented in the parliament. And within the space of a short 4 or 5 years, he did a very good, commendable job, laying the foundation of what we subsequently knew as the Southern Cameroon or West Cameroon. And the West Cameroon government, or Southern Cameroon government, had that responsibility, as decolonization was the in thing at that time. Remember, we were still a trust territory administered by Great Britain, and therefore a colonial territory. It was necessary to decolonize all over, all around in the 60s. The wind of change was blowing across Africa, as Harold Macmillan said. And therefore, every colonial territory was agitating for independence. So too were our people for independence. But because we are administered with Nigeria, much of the effort of our people had to focus on extricating us from the eastern region of Nigeria. And so in 1959, when all the discussions were going on, it was clear that we were going to become independent, as Britain itself was prepared to give Nigeria independence. And there was no way Britain could have given Nigeria independence, inclusive of the Southern Cameroon, because Southern Cameroon United Nations Trust Territory. They couldn't do that. It was impermissible under the law of the United Nations. And therefore, as independence for Nigeria approached, on the eastern side, the French got up one fine good morning and came out with a very clever trick and decided overnight, literally overnight, that they were going to grant what they call independence to French-speaking African countries, including French Cameroon. We all know the history subsequently, that what the French granted was, even the French themselves admitted, was fictitious independence. And we know it even up to today, that independence still remains very fictitious. So the fate of the Southern Cameroons was hanging in the balance. Nigeria was going to achieve independence in 1960. French Cameroon was going to achieve independence in 1960. What was going to happen to the Southern Cameroon? You would have thought that naturally the answer would be, of course, the Southern Cameroon is going to achieve independence as well, and which is what our people were asking for, that we had to achieve independence. Now, at the United Nations, and even within Southern Cameroon itself, the British came up with one trick after the other. They commissioned a report, what they called the consequences of the Southern Cameroons ceasing to become a part of Nigeria. This was in 1959. And Sir Philipson, who was the chairman of that commission, concluded that the Southern Cameroons will not be viable as an independent state. You can see the flaw in all of that. If Nigeria is going to achieve independence, French Cameroon is going to achieve independence, that had nothing to do with us. Our territory itself had to achieve independence, whether or not we stayed with or left Nigeria. So that report dealing with the consequences of Southern Cameroon with Nigeria was neither here nor there. And the conclusion, in fact, was something that was decided well in advance to influence the Southern Cameroon delegation that was going to leave for the United Nations in New York and to request for independence of the Southern Cameroon. So that report was intended to influence that thinking. And indeed, it influenced it. Because if you read the report, the Southern Cameroon delegation that went to the United Nations, the British Sir Andrew Cohen, who was the ambassador, led the chorus by chanting that the Southern Cameroons would not be viable as an independent country. A number of its British allies, Australia and so on, New Zealand, they echoed the same story. That yes, the report is clear, the Southern Cameroons will not be independent, will not be viable as an independent country. And then, of course, our people, instead of doing their own independent research, instead of asking, but this report is not commissioned by the United Nations. Why is it that the United Nations did not commission a report, if that was necessary? So they too start repeating the same thing. Oh, the Southern Cameroon will not become viable if it was granted separate independence. And so the chairlady of that commission at the UN, a lady from Liberia, concluded the debate by saying it is too obvious that the Southern Cameroons will not become economically viable if it became a separate independent country. And that therefore, the United Nations was going to craft the question for the plebiscite in such a way as to remove any possibility of the Southern Cameroon becoming a separate independent country. That is the origin of your two plebiscite questions. Do you wish to achieve independence by joining Nigeria? Do you wish to achieve independence by joining French Cameroon? Something which is really nonsensical, of a country achieving independence by joining some independent country. A choice which is not made by our people at all. So that thing was rammed down the throat of our people. Even though Foncha and Ndeli made a joint statement at the United Nations saying that they are rushing our people too much, our people needed time to think this thing all over, and that they would suggest that the plebiscite be deferred until sometime in 1962. Britain said, no way, it must be plebiscite now. And they forced our people to that plebiscite. But I want to call attention to the fact that the way the plebiscite questions were framed was to avoid the impression that a UN trust territory was simply going to be handed over to one of its neighbors. Because the United Nations Charter 76B mandated the administrative territory to lead it to self-government. By 1959, by 1960, the Southern Cameroon was fully self-governing. That was the penultimate stage to become an independent country. So independence was in the offing. They knew this. And so therefore, to avoid criticism, even within the United Nations, that Britain had no power whatsoever to hand over the Southern Cameroon as a colonial territory to a neighboring country. Because if that happened, that would mean the territory had not been decolonized. So they came up with independence by joining, insisting that the primary thing was independence. The territory had to achieve independence. Joining was secondary. And the word that was used as joining was never defined anywhere. However, in relation to French Cameroon and the Southern Cameroons, both parties agreed. And this was subscribed to by UK government, that the word joining meant forming a federation of two states equal in status. Remember, French Cameroon at the time of joining would already have become independent. Equality in status means what? It can only mean that the Southern Cameroons would have achieved independence. That would be called equality of political status. two independent countries joining. And that was what was meant. It couldn't have been anything else. Otherwise, the UN would have been accused of transferring a UN trust territory for colonization by a neighboring country. So independence had to be achieved, and after the independence achieved, there was the joining, which is defined as the two constituting a federation of two states, equal in status. The size of each of those states did not matter. It had to be two states. French Cameroon could have been 100 million. It didn't matter. And and the Southern Cameroon only 500,000. Did not matter at all. It had to be two states. Equality of status as one independent country, another independent country joining, coming together to form a federation of two states.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prof, for that brief. I want us to highlight today two specific things from that history between 1954 and 1961, where we became part of Cameroon. 1954, our parliamentarians declared benevolent neutrality in Nigeria because they thought that the politics in the Enugu House wasn't involving Southern Cameroons. It was none of their business. Then they moved out to Boya and formed our government. And Nigeria didn't even have any legal backing to fight them because all the parliamentarians moved out to their own country and they formed their own government. And that is how we moved separated from Nigeria. Because I'm saying this because parliamentarians have got, the Southern Cameroon parliamentarians now, they've got this argument that they are putting forth. How does my resigning from Parliament, how does my leaving La Republique Parliament help the struggle, help bring forth the issue of the Southern Cameroonians? And Wiba put it nicely. He said, yes, you might not want to resign as a parliamentarian, but you are not supposed to go to Yaoundé Parliament because all the deliberations of the Yaoundé Parliament does not in any way improve on the livelihood of the people who voted you.
Yeah. So
Wiba implied in the interview that he did with BBC is that all our parliamentarians who we voted, and for the past 30 years that we have been voting them into that parliament, the parliament does not serve us any purpose like the parliament of Nigeria. And by implications, our parliamentarians should leave that parliament and go to Boya. They don't have any excuse because I'm still to think of a law in Cameroon that was enacted because Southern Cameroonian parliamentarians rose it in parliament and it was voted into a law. I'm yet to think of that. So that is the first thing that I want us to establish, so that when our people talk to their resident parliamentarians, they should tell them the implications of them going to Yaoundé in the name of representing them. Because the people's mandate is that we vote you as a parliamentarian to kind of safeguard our interests with government. And if you are going to Yaoundé and all the trying to safeguard, you get up and you talk like Wiba and you are shut down, you are issued a warrant of arrest, then it is what the Frenchman calls, it's inutile, it's useless.
Yes.
It's useless for you to go there. So that is the first thing that I wanted us to establish about the 1954 incident. And then the warning, the head of the Nigerian parliament in 1961, the chief in the Enugu state, he warned that we are moving into a country, if we go and join those people, we will join people, and Ndele echoed the same sentiments, that we are going to go and join people who would brutalize us with their army, ask us to show passes to go, just to go around our own neighborhood. We will have to present pass and all those things. This is one of the things that I wanted us, because it's happening again now. Like in Bamenda, if you want to move from one neighborhood to the other, you have to show a pass. Yes, they call it an ID today. It's a pass. That is infringement in human. I mean, why wouldn't I walk around my own neighborhood where I was born and I grew up in? Who gives a policeman or a gendarme the audacity to come to my house and be asking for my documents in my house? So Prof, I wanted you to share that little experience from 1961 when we joined these people and they brought in their military because this treatment today, it didn't start today. This is a consistent habit.
Yes.
And those of us who are fighting to remain, we must know that this thing started in 1961, this torture, this maltreatment, this brutality. And if we continue, it's only going to improve. I mean, it's getting better.
Yes.
So I wanted you to talk a little bit to that transition, how they brought the brutality, something that we never used to have. I mean, somebody sued our prime minister to court, and the prime minister was forced to appear in court. That's how democratic as a country we used to be. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that.
Let me get back to
Anyangwe
and our parliamentarians. Now, I think our parliamentarians should do a little bit more of reading and introspection. Our parliamentarians who were in Anyangwe Assembly were also elected from the Southern Cameroons, just like they are elected now in the Southern Cameroons, to a parliament which is outside of the Southern Cameroons. There's two parallel things. The Anyangwe Parliament was outside the Southern Cameroons. The French Cameroon Parliament Yaoundé is outside the Republic of Cameroon. The second thing to note is that the number of people who went to Anyangwe, just like the number of people who are in Yaoundé, are totally insignificant. They are not in a position, the one in Anyangwe is not in a position to influence any policy, anything. Just like the one in Yaoundé Parliament, they are in no position to influence any legislation or any policy in French Cameroon. So our people, our parliamentarians, the plus with our parliamentarians in Anyangwe is that they realize this and said, look, if we continue like this, our country will continue to remain backward. There is no development. And I would have expected also that our MPs who are sitting in Yaoundé there, knowing that even in terms of numbers, they are insignificant, and they can always be a rule, and French Cameroon people have said this several times, they are insignificant. They can't influence anything at all. And they would have realized that they have not achieved not a single major thing from that house that has brought us development or progress in the Southern Cameroons. Nothing. And they should sit down and realize, like the MPs in Anyangwe, and say, look, this being the case, all the debate that goes on in there, everything there is about French Cameroon, French Cameroon, French Cameroon. If there's anything that relates to the Southern Cameroon, it is an afterthought. And so therefore, they should have been saying, and I urge them to say, that look, we are making no significant contribution in this assembly in relation to our territory. And therefore, we are declaring benevolent neutrality. We are not going to be involved in the politics of French Cameroon. We are moving from here and going back to our territory, to our own parliament, where we can decide our own laws and influence policies of our government. And that is a message which I think our parliamentarians should realize now. This is a national call for them. And they cannot continue to say, how does my resignation or my living there influence things in the Southern Cameroons? If Endelis and Foncha and the rest and Monas and so on had adopted that same attitude, my goodness, we would still be in Anyangwe today, so to speak. So their moving out is a statement they are making. And move out, I would still urge them to do. Now, I was narrating this story about independence by joining. And in the UN scheme of things, in April, they approved the Plebiscite vote, which voted primarily for independence of the Southern Cameroons. I keep on insisting on this. The joining was a secondary thing. Because after that vote for independence, they could decide not to have joined. That was this, they could say, no, we're not joining. So, that independence had to be achieved, and that is why in April, the United Nations adopted Resolution 1608-15 of the 21st of April 1961, endorsing that independence vote and setting 1st October as the effective date of that independence. Now, what the United Nations did, which was a little bit untidy, was that on that 1st October, it conflated three events. The first event was the achievement of independence effectively on that day. The second event was the ending of the trusteeship. And the third event on the same day was the date of the joining the formation of the federation of two states equal in status. But that equality of status never got, because on 1st of September 1961, French Cameroon passed a law in its parliament, simply annexing the southern Cameroons, claiming that it is part of its territory given back to it by the United Nations and Great Britain. And the document, that annexation document, was deceptively styled federal constitution. And I think that is why our inattentive people do not pay much attention to those provisions which made that declaration, that annexationist declaration. The British made matters worse because on 1st October, instead of us achieving independence, what did they do? They themselves confessed. They transferred us to French Cameroon. In other words, they ceded the southern Cameroon to French Cameroon without any authority. They had no authority whatsoever to do that. And so on the departure of the British from the southern Cameroon found themselves with a new colonial authority, being French Cameroon, that immediately established a colonial administration in the southern Cameroon, and since then will be under colonial administration. And part of that colonial administration was the repressive apparatus that French Cameroon instituted immediately. In fact, even before 1st October, in September, they are sent in troops that committed the massacre at Ebubu. At least 12 people were killed. They have never apologized for that killing, which they did since that time. The shedding of blood in the southern Cameroon started at that time. And since then, what has been happening? Periodically, they will let loose their military forces to kill people, to conduct what they call kale in their language. Kale in English is a cordon and search operation. This is a technique that was developed in Indochina by the French, where when you suspect one individual in an area, you cordon off the area and everybody became guilty, and you exacted punishment on all of them, humiliated them. This is what was happening all over our territory. Remember, our people never had an army. You had a police force, but even the police force had no guns, had but a baton stick. And so the presence of a foreign army, speaking a foreign language, commanded by a foreign commanders, was very traumatic for our people. And our people did not just know how to go about resisting all of this humiliation and degradation that was happening. And since then, these killings have been going on. And the killings and the terrorization and the humiliation was buttressed by a whole series of draconian laws. I call them laws because frankly those are non-laws at all. One of the very early ones, which was crafted in 1960 but passed into law in 1962, was what is called the Subversion Ordinance. The Subversion Ordinance made every person a prisoner. So the whole of our territory was an open prison. Anything you did was subversion, for which there was no trial even. You were simply picked up and you disappeared. And if a relative decided to go and ask, but my relative had disappeared, you became the next victim and you disappeared. Anybody who has read Mukong's book, Prisoners Without a Crime, this whole story is narrated there in that book. And our people from Victoria to Nkambe suffered all of this. These atrocities that were being now committed, and this time in the name of the law. I do recall the ICJ, the International Commission of Jurists, wrote to Mr. Hijo of Cameroon protesting against the subversion law, that it was illegal, it offended against international law, it offended international human rights law. But of course, it was never repealed. It stayed on. And the excuse that was given was that the regime was fighting Bamileke and Bassa Makiza in the bush. But Bamileke land, Bassa land, is not part of the southern Cameroon. So why import that kind of a law in the southern Cameroon? Then there was another series of law. Many people tend to forget about this. The law on identity cards. for you to move from one subdivision, even from one town to another, you had to exhibit a pass to military officers before you could pass. If you do not, you are not. You could even be arrested. And by law, you are required to carry your carte d'identité on your person at all times. Even if you left your house just to go to a kitchen which is outside of the house, the gendarme could arrest you. The military could arrest you because you don't have your carte d'identité along with you. The other aspect of this carte d'identité, I must say, is that as the years went by, it became an instrument of profiling our people. Because remember, that carte d'identité had very, very intrusive information. The name of your father and your mother, where you were born, what you were doing, the village where you came from, your names, and so on and so forth, including special marks on your body, because when you went to take the identity card, they stripped you and they looked through your body to see whether you had any special marks, and it was recorded there on that card identity. So it was easy for them. When they stopped you, as you're always doing, they asked you for card identity. He opened it. The names you easily tell, where you came from easily tell, and therefore they could do exactly what they wanted to do with you. Now, our people, this humiliation is not today. The killings is not today. The terrorization is not today. It has been going on for 56 years. It's just that at this time, our people said, we've had enough. We'd rather be dead than be alive and to be treated in this way. At least we deserve some minimum respect at the very least, which French Cameroon was not prepared to concede to us and has never been prepared to concede to us. So that is the story, how people have suffered at the hands of these people.
Yeah. So first of all, Prof, the good thing is on the 1st of October, we restored our independence, the demonstrations across the world, in as much as we again were met by brutality from La République. And what I want you to talk about from a legal perspective is the militarization. What are the legal implications of another country militarizing another in our case? So I want us to start from there. And then now we have over 5,000 refugees, according to the UN Human Rights Report, that have moved across to Nigeria. What are the implications of all this? And then I want you to tie that to the case that we have with that you and the president and other leaders are setting up at the ICC against these people. So tell us about the legal implications of continuous militarization of our territory by La République du Cameroun.
No self-respecting people ever accepted humiliation or terrorization, which has been unleashed on us since the past 56 years. And when you add, that is compounded by a full-scale militarization, positioning of troops armed to the teeth as if going to war in a territory. That in itself is terror. That in itself is aggression. Terror and aggression invite the right to self-defense. Because when the terrorizing state, when the army of the terrorizing state resorts to violence, it cannot possibly accept, conceive that the people being terrorized would simply sit by and not do anything. It's a right of self-defense. There's even a right to rebellion. Rebellion against oppressive rule. Rebellion against terror and oppression. So everything our people have done has been within the law, and nothing has been outside of the law. In fact, the African Charter, the African Human Rights Charter, in its Article 20, gives to a people that is colonized and fighting for decolonization, as we are, the right to appeal for assistance from third states to ward off, to fight away the colonial entity, the colonial country that is keeping them under colonial subjugation. And this is all right, it's constitutional international law. La République du Cameroon or French Cameroon can go up and down. It can shout secession from morning to evening. It will not work. We have challenged them for the past 56 years to show us one single instrument of international law in terms of which French Cameroon and the Southern Cameroon were lawfully one. They are unable to do so. Every time what they do is they advance some silly political argument about a so-called unification, or they call it reunification, whatever thing that might mean, that has no basis in international law at all. Two countries don't come together on the basis of some fake reunification or unification of what nobody knows. Because the existence of French Cameroon, which is still a Republic of Cameroon, as an international and separate entity, came only as from 1922, not before then. So too the Southern Cameroons. So to argue that there was something called reunification or whatever thing it is purely a political, historical argument. And if we're to push that right back, no country will be safe. The entire northern part of French Cameroon itself, from Adamawa right up to the extreme north, will be part of Nigeria, because everybody knows that was part of the conquest of Adama, of Nigeria, the Empire. And if you push that still further, then you'd argue that part of Gabon, part of Equatorial, part of Central African Republic, part of Chad, all of that should become part of French Cameroon. But they know they cannot make that claim. It is untenable in law. It is untenable even as a political demand. So because they have no argument, they fall back on these words which they believe. When they use them, it has some magical powers. Reunification has no magical power to force us to be with them. So-called secession, which is simply in their mind, will not make us change our views to get away, to be free, to exit from one of the most vicious forms of colonial oppression the world has ever witnessed. I would suggest that perhaps they should start thinking about reorganizing themselves, assuming they stay as an entity.
Okay, Prof, what I want to point your attention in is you are part of the team that have submitted the application at the ICC. We all know that La République is not did not ratify the Rome Statute. I want to find out legally, do you think that our case at the ICC still has the possibility of going through, so that
La République did not ratify. La République, there are many international instruments it has not ratified. La République is not a credible member of the international community. I can tell you, the Genocide Convention of 1948, it has not ratified it. Why has it not ratified it? It is as if it knew what it was going to do. In any case, in this particular instance, whether it has ratified or it has not ratified it is purely irrelevant. First, although it has not ratified, it has signed a treaty. And in terms of international law, the law of treaty is very, very clear. Once you've signed a treaty, you are not allowed to do anything that defeats the object and purpose of that treaty. So La République cannot do that. Secondly, the United Nations Security Council has the power to refer a situation such as we described occurring in a country. Whether that country has ratified the treaty or has not ratified the ICC treaty, the Rome Statute, makes no difference. So if French Cameroon sits back in happy ignorance, thinking that because it has not ratified, therefore it is shielded from international justice, it is grossly mistaken. If you look at what happened in Sudan, the Sudanese never signed it, but that did not prevent the UN from making a referral. The same thing happened in Ivory Coast. So The application, it gets through and eventually gets to the United Nations. When they assess the application, analyze it, and found that indeed what we are saying is true, the United Nations Security Council is free to refer the situation. I'm not too sure that the president of that country and others who are most criminally responsible for the crimes that were committed, which they ordered, and this was not, they ordered the commission of those crimes, and other accomplices, they might sit back and think they enjoy some form of immunity. The ICC, the Rome Statute is very clear. The status of those persons, whether as head of state, military commander, is irrelevant. You saw Uhuru Kenyatta appeared before the ICC. So there is no way they can hide. For the time being, they can continue to run. They can hide. But a criminal government at some point necessarily has to collapse. And you start picking up all these people. And I think that even quite apart from the ICC, these people will not escape trial because sooner or later, for the crimes they have committed, each one of them would have to be arrested by one of the signatory countries or one of the members of the international community and tried for those crimes.
Okay, thank you, Prof. So now I want us to look at some of the resolutions that came out of the fourth conclave that led to the formation of our interim government. So the very first question that I want to ask there for our viewers is, what is the role of our interim government? I think we need to have that very clearly.
The interim government, the first thing, of course, for the interim government is to launch on a diplomatic offensive. I know that word has been, or that expression has been well flogged, so that now it probably sounds already something in people's ears. But here I mean really, really, really getting out and doing some real work. What is that work? Our case, unlike in case of other territories, is so clear and so compelling. We have a people recognized by international law. We have a territory well secured by international boundary treaties. Some people don't realize that the boundaries of the southern Cameroon were not fixed by French Cameroon. They were fixed by international treaty. They are well defined and many instances well demarcated. So we have a territory, well-defined territory, we have a people, and what was simply lacking was a government. And the government is there. So that government has to assert control over the territory. And the way of asserting control over the territory, you either do it by force, by kicking out the colonial oppressor, one way, or you appeal to the colonial oppressor that continuing colonial occupation by your forces and your colonial administration will serve you no good. That perhaps is in your own interest also to pull back your troops and pull back your colonial administration, so that the people of the territory can have full control over the territory, organize their life, and start living and start rebuilding their territory. That's one way. But if the colonial occupier refuses to see reason and continue with his oppression and repression, killings as we saw of recent, maiming, raping, abducting for ransom, disappearing people, mass graves, surely a time must come when such an oppressed people must rise up and say, we've had enough. We must defend ourselves. And that will be consistent with international law. I know our people have often, I want to use the word squeamish, not really squeamish, but very strategic by saying, look, our case is so compelling, we don't need to use force. Eventually, reason will prevail. The force of argument will eventually prevail, which is why all this while we resorted to peaceful demonstrations. Everything peaceful. But surely a time would come when at some point this oppression, these massacres become unbearable, and somebody somewhere would say, we've had enough of this. And there will be confrontation, definitely. Even if after that confrontation you have to meet in some conference room, which would inevitably have to happen. But then, for the purposes of our own dignity as a people, of our own self-respect as a people, that might necessarily have to come. So the interim government has twofold responsibility to canvass for recognition and support in any form whatsoever from cooperating partners, from those countries, from those organizations that are willing and ready to provide that kind of support. It also has at the same time a responsibility to assert full control over its territory. Are peaceful means, or if after a period of time that peaceful means does not succeed, then the people have to resort to self-defense, which is recognized under international law and the law of the United Nations.
Okay. So on the concrete resolutions again, I think resolution 11, resolution 10 and 11 talks about returning to self-rule, and it gives a mandate of traditional rulers to starting to administer our people. As young people, we know that some of our traditional rulers are on the payroll of La Republique government. What was the rationale behind this kind of decision to point our people back to traditional rulers at the moment?
Yes, we have noticed over the years that some traditional rulers have been diverting from their traditional roles. I know the French Cameroon government has hijacked a number of them to become what they call auxiliaries of administration. I'm not too sure what that means, but that simply means that they will be fronting for French Cameroon government, fronting for its political party and so on, as against some amount of money being paid for them. And because of that, some of these chiefs, these traditional rulers, have diverted from their main purpose for which they exist and against their own very citizens. And we are saying here that traditional leadership must recenter, go back to fulfill their traditional mandate, what they are supposed to do, and to stop allowing themselves to be manipulated from Yaoundé for certain ends, to perpetuate the colonization of their own people, the oppression and repression of their own very people. I must sound a note of warning here. If you read history, one of the reasons why chieftaincy was abolished in Guinea, was abolished in Tanzania and in a number of African countries, was precisely because of this kind of conduct, and the argument was that the chiefs are nothing other than agents of neocolonialism of the colonial people, and that therefore the people need to free themselves from the tyranny of these chiefs. So traditional leadership in the southern country must be very, very careful here what they are doing, because every conduct of theirs is being carefully watched. Every pronouncement of theirs is being carefully watched. We don't want a situation where it happened like other country. On achievement of decolonization, getting back to Boya, we decree that traditional leadership is abolished. That is not something we want to see happen, because we think our traditional leadership has a very important role to play in fostering our culture, in protecting their own very people according to our culture, in settling disputes according to our customs and traditions, and upholding many of our traditional things, cultures in our communities, which we value as positive. So long as our chiefs stay within that context and do not allow themselves to be used by the colonial oppressor, there's a great chance that the traditional leadership is going to be maintained and even given an enhanced role in that respect in the new dispensation that is bound to come.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. So, Prof, you have been around the struggle, actively involved from the early 90s, organizer of the All Anglophone Conference 1 and 2. So you are quite used to La Republique antics. Yes. When it comes to diluting the pressure from Southern Cameroonians whenever we are pushing them to get autonomy or pushing them to get something. And why I refer back to AAC, All Anglophone Conference 1 and 2 and your participation then, and since then you have been resolute. I mean, most of the people, we know how they end up buying leaders. Most of the people at the time, your class at the time, went on to become ministers in La Republique. And obviously, we all know the records of how that went down, because their tactics of take one of the leaders, make them a minister, push them against the other and all that. But the tactics that I want to refer to now is what happened immediately after Honorable Weber's interview with the BBC, where he actually nailed La Republique to the cross. Immediately after that, we got news that a police officer has been killed in Jakiri. And after that, few hours later, another police officer has been killed in Bamenda, another one in Bafut, and not like it continues like that. And we already know what we expect. We expect hundreds and hundreds of arrests, more brutality and all that. I just want you to talk to our people about this antics, this tactics that La Republique keeps on using on our people, just so, yeah, because you have been around and you know all those things. So I just want you to talk to that.
We are dealing with a country, with a government that knows only 2 or 3 rules how to face any situation. The first one, instinctively, is to use force. When anything happens, they don't use their heads. The first thing is use force. Go in, beat them, torture them, kill them. Then they will learn, and they will never dare again try to challenge authority again. Their main motto is la peur de gendarme et le commencement de la sagesse. So the fear of gendarme is the beginning of wisdom. That is a governing principle. Sending the gendarmes, sending the military to kill, do maximum havoc. And part of this killing, cynically, is to kill even their own, so as to blame it on the opponent and give them an extra opportunity to do even more killings. We've seen this happen right from the days of the SDF. These people, this government is very, very cynical. It will not hesitate to eliminate one of his very own, so long as it can plant that on the opponent and take that as an opportunity to wreak more havoc. So that is his use of force. The other thing which it is very good at using is corruption. They move around by day, they come Nicodemously, that is, they come by night with sacks of money and bribe perceived leaders or influential people. What do they bribe them for? They bribe them so that they can turn against the unvery people. They bribe them so that they can start speaking a different narrative contrary to what their people stand for. And thirdly, they bribe them by offering them what they call ministerial position or some other position, some evanescent positions. Now, it is well documented how to go about these things. And so we've learned over the years that this government that has been in power, including even its predecessor, does not use its head. It does not sit down to say, strategize and say, well, if I did this, what might be the consequences? Can I do this? No. Instinctively. Use force, use money to bribe, corrupt people, promise them positions, whatever positions. And those who go for that kind of bait, they know very well that these things do not last. First of all, you lose your respectability and you become a prisoner. You lose your independence, you lose your power of thinking. You only become like a puppet, with the regime being the puppeteer, controlling you, dictating what you should do, what you should not do, and so on and so forth. So all of this way of conducting business, so to speak, is now very familiar, and so it doesn't come to us as a surprise. The kind of thing you are saying, and the saddest thing about it is that this country, this regime, knows nothing about what we call commission of inquiry. In civilized environments, when you have a killing like the ones you just reported, they'll say, well, let's have a commission of inquiry to get the truth, to get at the bottom of it. But they will not have a commission of inquiry precisely because they know exactly what they have done. In later years, of course, you'll find people start confessing some of these things. There are a lot of books that are floating around where people, Cameroonese people, are now writing and exposing and telling the kind of things they were asked to do and so on and so forth. So we know the character and the nature of this particular regime, this particular people, how it behaves.
Yeah. So, Prof, how do now our people, I mean, we know after them singing and brandishing on international media that military officers have been killed, we know that the rampant arrest, the brutality is just going to heighten up in the next, I mean, it's already started in towns of Bamenda and also in Kumu. So how do our people now keep themselves safe? Because they cannot fight back. They don't have weapons to fight back. How do they keep themselves safe from the
I'm afraid in this regard, I'm a bearer of bad news. All of us, we have to live to hard reality that we are dealing here with the devil. The devil has no pity. Whether they had some officer killed or not whatsoever, they will still exact what they want to do. So our people, I'm afraid, will still have to face some dark days for some time to come. Because what you've just described, what the media is carrying, there's no means of verifying the veracity of all of this. News that 1 or 2 gendarmes have been killed, and it's so much headlines. When on 1st October, scores and scores of people were killed. Apart from a broad distance, nobody made. 1 or 2 gendarmes killed. It's so much news. And by who? We don't even know. Any thinking government, its first reaction would have been, okay, these reports are coming in. We want to investigate. And in view of the fact that we have no control over the southern Cameroon, what is happening there, let's perhaps appeal to some international body to come and carry out some investigation there. Any thinking government would react in that way. So I'll get at the bottom of it. But I'm suggesting that they will not do that precisely because they know the game they are playing, to call it a game, setting the stage for subsequent more killings, more maimings, more rapes, more abduction for ransoms, disappearing, and so on and so forth. That's why I say our people have to brace themselves for some really, really dark days for a long time, for some time to come.
Yeah. So from December last year, when they started the killings and the brutality, arrest, and all that, there's been a lot of talks, like especially from our organization. There's been a lot of talk about the UN, the AU, the UN Secretary General, and all that intervening in some way. And can we trust organizations like this? I know that you led in the early 2000s.
Yes.
You were lead counsel for Southern Cameroons when we won the case in the African Human Rights Court. So should we trust in the UN? What do you think around about these institutions? Are they trustworthy? Can our people count on these institutions?
Okay, the first thing, remember, these are intergovernmental organizations, the United Nations and the AU. intergovernmental organizations, that these are organizations formed by independent states. The UN, to begin with, is an extremely slow, bureaucratic organization. Very, very, very slow. And more often they speak in tongues. They'll tell you it's diplomacy. Now, they will never come straight to tell you what they're thinking, whatever it might be that they're thinking. And in many instances, they're very, very convoluted. And they're used to bureaucracy and a way of saying things, writing things, which is in essence very repetitive. So it is an organization, if we are to deal with, you must have the patience of Job. In other words, it's most unlikely that you can have a situation now, in a week's time, in a month's time, you have a result from the United Nations. It's never going to happen. First of all, because when states gather there, they're always very quarrelsome and argue like children. We've seen what happens even in the Security Council. Something which is clear, it is vetoed by somebody. The reason is because these states are fostering their own individual interest. And they use the United Nations as a tool to implement their national policies. That's what's happened. That's the reality of the situation. So if they see that this particular situation is going to foster, a country sees that this particular will foster its own national interest, it's going to take a strong position in favor of that situation in the United Nations. But if it does not, then it opposes, or at the very best, it abstains. There are papers. Over the years, Britain has made it very, very clear. It is not going to support any position in the United Nations that does not foster the interest, that does not promote the interest of Great Britain, whatever that interest might be. And I suppose what Britain says is exactly what other countries are saying. And of course, more so with the big powers, less so with European countries, and insignificantly with African countries, because African countries are simply there to swell the number. They are in no position in the UN to influence much. Now, at the AU, which is a much smaller organization and nearer to us, one would have thought that they were much more even proactive. But unfortunately, the way the AU is set up is such that it doesn't make allowance for that kind of quick, rapid reaction to situations that are developing on the ground in the African continent. And depending upon who is the chairperson or the chairman of the organization and who is the chairperson of the African Commission, African Union Commission, these are political persons and they play political games. And quite often, they position themselves in a situation where it doesn't go contrary to the position of their respective government where they come from. If you take, for example, the current chairperson of AU Commission, he is from Chad. It's doubtful that he's going to take a position contrary to what, because Chad put him up there and elected mostly by French-speaking African countries. It's most unlikely that he's going to take a position that goes contrary. However, these two organizations have made very interesting pronouncements. The United Nations has said, and has said so consistently, that the Southern Cameroon's issues cannot be resolved except by going to what it calls the root cause of the problem. And I submit here, the root cause of that problem is the fact that the Southern Cameroon is under colonial occupation, and the people are fighting for decolonization. That is a reality which French Cameroon doesn't want to face. But it has to face that reality and decolonize. Colonialism is out of date. Colonialism is a crime against international law. Colonialism is impermissible. What would French Cameroon think if Nigeria, for example, decided to move over, send a troop and take over the territory and say, look, Osman Danfodio had conquered half of this country here, and therefore we're asserting our authority over it? What would it think? It would be crying foul. So why should it think that what is not good for the gander will not be good for the goose? So that's one pronouncement which has made, which is in our favor, and this is what we've been saying all along. The second thing, and that's what the AU has done, it has made a statement reminding French Cameroon of the basic principle of the organization, which is respect for the intangibility of the frontiers of African countries as they obtain on the date of each country's independence. French Cameroon knows this. When did it achieve independence? This is something it has been hiding from its people. They want people to know when it's independence. They had a manufactured thing about 20th May. They manufactured the one to try to cover that so that its population does not know. It achieved independence on 1st January. So ask ourselves, what were its borders as of 1st of January? If you look at it, you find that the southern Cameroon was not part of its borders. So that's why I said earlier that all this the stupid talk about secession is pure fancy, and it won't take them anywhere at all. Respect international law. Respect the borders of a country as obtained on date of independence. We are not manufacturing these things. This is part of international law. La République du Cameroon, or French Cameroon, is defying international law and expect international community to come in its help in defiance, in violation of international law. It cannot happen. It wouldn't happen. So these two things, whatever would have happened, the slowness or whatever thing it is, I think these are positive development. One, attend to the root cause of the problem, which is that of decolonization. Two, respect the African fundamental principle of the intangibility of frontiers as of the date of obtaining independence by each African country.
So now, keeping it around the UN again, we know that there is a UN Human Rights Commission review currently going on in Geneva, Switzerland right now as we speak. And in the next coming, they are reviewing human rights abuses in countries around the world, and Cameroon is one of them. And we know that Southern Cameroon's a delegation was invited to do a presentation on our case in Switzerland.
Yeah.
So in the next coming days or weeks, we are expecting to hear that commission read out its findings on the human rights abuses in Cameroon. We also know that Cameroon has banned one of the human rights organizations that were giving out stats of the number of people dead in southern Cameroon from the 22nd of September and the 1st of October. They banned that organization. But what I want us to go to, and it still concerns the UN again, the governor of Cross River State in Nigeria has put it point blank and said the UN is shying away and playing lip service to the people of Southern Cameroon. And he says so reasonably because almost 5,000 of our people have run across the border into his state and is becoming a burden on his state affairs. And he's supposed to, by international law, take care of those people. And Prof, you visited them last week. You were there with the refugees last week and all that. So I want you to tell our people at home and around the world about the state, the condition that our people are in Nigeria, the ones that are running away from repression in Nigeria, so that we can, solicit that people support our health and support services so that they can raise money and help those people in Nigeria. So tell us a little bit about your experience visiting the refugees.
First, let me take a few seconds on the point of human rights violations you mentioned. I want people to know that French Cameroon is an internationally delinquent state. If you went to the African Human Rights Commission, you just thumb through the pages of cases, you'll be amazed by how many suits have been filed, how many communications have been filed against French Cameroon for human rights violation. When I saw it, I was really very, very surprised. This is a country that respects no rules at all, except its own. And in some cases, even its own, it doesn't. Go also to the Human Rights Committee in Geneva. Look through the cases that it has there. Most people only have heard about the one of Mukong and Dinka. There are many others that are there. And 3/4 of these cases, French Cameroon loses big time. And it has to pay. But of course, in continuation of its delinquency, it does not honor decisions that are given either by the African Human Rights Commission or the Human Rights Committee at Geneva. So this is a country That is internationally delinquent as far as human rights issues are concerned. What is going on in Geneva now? Proceedings are going on. The Human Rights Committee has asked La République representative many questions relating to what is happening in the southern Cameroons. You know what? They couldn't answer the questions, and they begged for time to go and think over, meaning they have to get orders from Yaoundé what to say. When they do that, what it means. So Yaoundé is going to manufacture something, which is a lie, and send over to them. Then they go and read at the commission, at the committee. But the committee is not fooled. The committee is aware of the different reports that have come in, and is not fooled at all. So this delinquent country is a laughing stock all over the world. Wherever it tries to raise its head, it's a laughing stock. Now I come to the issue of refugees. You talked of 5,000. That is a small number. Maybe you're talking about the Calabar district. The High Commission for refugees, when I visited, talked of a figure in the south of Nigeria. You are talking of Benue, you are talking Cross River State, and so on, of not less than 40,000 to 60,000 people.
Oh my God.
You are talking of an equal number, if not more, that have fled to Taraba State, or further up north, places like Yola and so on. So the figure we're looking at now is over 100,000 people. And more are still flowing in. If you've ever been to a refugee camp, it was the first time I went to a refugee camp, and I looked at our people, I shed tears. I shed tears because I realized, I asked myself, how can a human being, yesterday, self-sufficient, had his own dignity and pride, all of a sudden he reduced to this beggarly level, depending upon handouts in places like camps, with all the efforts Nigeria is doing and the state governments are doing, trying to give them life that is as comfortable as they can, yet you are still a refugee, packed together. Some instances like sardine. I was able to witness many of the young people who were shot by French Cameroon soldiers. The wounds are still there. I saw it in my own eyes. And I just could not understand. Now it began to dawn on me, this whole idea of man's inhumanity to man. And I asked myself, why are we treated this way? What have we done to these people to be treated this way? Throughout, we have always been nice to the French Cameroon people. We've accommodated them, led them into our territory, given them access to all our resources, everything. This is how they pay us. Reduce our people to this level. And when you see this kind of a thing, you ask yourself, is there even any room for any compromise when I hear people talking about, oh, let's go and talk, let's go and talk. Like somebody said, when have you ever seen a sheep and a wolf cohabiting? It can never happen. These people are baying for our blood and are still searching for our blood. So the refugee situation, the refugee flows will still going to come. The recent killings you just mentioned for yesterday and the day before has provoked more people escaping across the border. Maybe this is part of the strategy of French Cameroon to empty our territory so they take over, have population transfer, and they come and take over. Perhaps that's their strategy. We don't know. But I can bet you that somebody somewhere is going to say, enough is enough. Sooner or later. It may take 10 years, it may take 20 years, it may take 50 years, I do not know. But at that point, an end will put to this nonsense. Because I know, Pierre is only human. He's not going to live forever. His edifice will come collapsing. The people he calls soldiers, they're also human. You shoot them, they will die. Blood also flows through their veins. They have families. And that's why in one of our appeals, we appeal to those of them who still use their head, they shouldn't allow themselves to be used to commit crimes against humanity or genocide. Because if they do that, there's going to be no escape for them.
Yeah, so so there is a call by our Health and Social Services Department that people should support so that they should be able to ameliorate the situation of our people. You know that the UN and also the Nigerian government, what they give our people as they run into Nigeria is basic.
Yes.
They give them basic, just a place to stay.
Yeah.
And like you have said, there are people there with their wounds, fresh wounds from, from injuries that like military people have caused on them. So I just want you to make that appeal. I know that amongst the 7 important departments that our government will have is also that Department of Health and Support Services because of this refugee crisis that is now in our hands. So I want you to also, I know that the president will be in London in a week for the conference, but then he will also be appealing for more and more support towards the refugees. I want you to call out to our people at home. There is a lot of people who run from one village, to another village and all that. Just make that appeal to our people to continuously share and be one another's keeper in this dark days that we are in. But overall, the international community that we should be coming together, putting together what we can put in to send to Nigeria so that our brothers and sisters be taken care of. There are pregnant women there, there are children, lots and lots of children there. So just make that appeal on your own to our viewers.
I talked about refugees. I mean, by refugee is a person who is fleeing from well-founded fear of persecution. But it's another group that even surprisingly, even the newspaper doesn't refer to them. We call them IDPs, internally displaced person, like you said. There are people who've escaped from one village to another. There are people who are in the bushes, up in the hills, and so on and so forth. They've escaped because they're afraid of this marauding French Cameroon military ready to shoot and kill at any point and any time. So that is another dimension of the problem, internally displaced person. I'm not too sure how we're going to deal with that situation. But with the refugees, fortunately we have somebody who is heading HSS, Health and Social Services. That person is doing a tremendous job, appealing, spending sleepless nights, thinking how we can bring relief to our people. Like you said, the Nigerian government, even the UN, can only provide the basic. Because a refugee camp, after all, is not a 4-star hotel. It's a camp. And they provide the basic. The other necessities of life, having a full belly, for example, would have to be provided by ourselves. Fortunately, I'm convinced and satisfied that our people are a caring people. We care for each other. And I've seen the tremendous effort that's been made by our diaspora people at the conclave. We had gifts that were coming from like Britain, Switzerland, as far as Norway, Belgium, America, and so on and so forth. And so I want to appeal to our people that nothing is too small to give. Organize yourself in our various communities. Put together what you have. Items of clothing, shoes, medicine, foodstuff, non-perishable foodstuff. All the things you have. And I'm sure each of us, in our different communities, in our households, we have lots of things which for over a year we've not even looked at, we've not touched, we've not used, and so on and so forth, and others we have no use for. Please, have within your different communities somebody to collect all of these things. We have collection centers. The people at home are doing their own very best as they can, under very difficult and strenuous circumstances, under repression. So we don't want to putting pressure on them. It's a responsibility of us in the diaspora to organize this relief effort so that we provide to our people who are out there in Nigeria and who come to flow there some reasonable, minimal level of comfort. Now, like you said, there are women, pregnant women had to escape. Some of them are giving birth there in those camps. There are children that are brought along. They have to go to school. Even if those schools are in those camps or in a neighborhood, we have to provide for this. For those women, often we just think about food and so on. They need a lot of sanitary issue things which they need to go for them. For the children, even basic things apart from clothing, like bags, like books, like pens and pencils and so on. I'm sure we have all of this in our homes lying around. Let's put all of these things together. Talk to our various communities. Have one person who will be collecting points. And after you've collected all of this, indicate to HSS. They organize how to pick up all of these things and eventually have them channeled through to Nigeria. Please, let us make this effort. For those of you who perhaps you don't have things but you have money, please contact HSS and send the little pennies what you have. If yesterday somebody had told us that we have our people, Ambazonia, becoming refugees, would have said, no, that is not possible. But that's the fate that has befallen us. So we must help our people. Yeah. And I'm here making this appeal. Let us all have some passion in your heart, some consideration for them, and send, so that our children, our pregnant women, our women, the girls who are there, the boys and the men who are there, have some minimal level of humanity and respect. Yeah. Thank you.
In respect to the refugee situations, Prof, actually, I have lots of respect for women. The work that the head of the HSS is pulling, she hardly sleeps at night. We are speaking with Kalesh and all that. And remarkably, I want to commend Mangang. Mangang, on leaving the US, half of her container, her business container, she went to her community and collected from toothpaste to Maggi to salt, everything, and filled her container to carry to Nigeria and help our brothers and sisters who are fleeing in. So our women are really champions.
Yes.
I think I really like that initiative. I think as communities we can come together, find drop-off points, drop off the toothpaste, toothbrushes, parts, sanitary parts, foodstuff that can last, toys for kids, books. Drop off all those things, and as communities we do our best to ship them if we can afford to ship them to Nigeria through SSS, of course, and also you call SSS if you cannot ship and say you have such and such things in this location. They'll find a way. They'll find a way to get those things to our people. So this particular show, we are partnering with HSS to be getting their message out. Every next Amba perspective. This one we didn't bring Kalesh on to talk more about their work, but then the next one on Saturday she will definitely be coming to talk more on how you can contact them, on how you can. There's a lot of people on ground who have been injured, who need help, who need medical assistance and all that, and they need support. And we are calling on our brothers and sisters in the medical profession. When you meet these people, you should know that they are people in need. And all the, you should not be asking them for too much money to treat them. Remember, these people are still hiding from repression.
Yes.
Because, like the news we are getting from home, when they see somebody with an injured wound in a hospital, they still terrorize them. They arrest some of the people. So it's the duty of our brothers and sisters who are nurses, doctors, all of them in the medical profession to protect our people now. I mean, in every revolution, the medical profession has played a vital role, and our people at home. Those in the medical profession, it's really time for them to step up their game now in the way that they support those people. So Prof, a question I forgot to ask you.
But before you get to a question, let me, I'm glad you mentioned this point about medical doctors and Mangang. I think she is also a very proactive lady. And she organizes very, very well. I think she's taken upon herself now the responsibility to do something for the women when we're there who are just giving birth to children, and we're very pleased that we have this kind of women who are taking all this on this selfless responsibility, give much of their time and resources so that we can achieve this goal. The other thing we discussed while visiting the refugees, even with Mangang as well, was that for people who are willing to contribute their time, nurses and doctors, which you mentioned, would be a very good thing if they volunteered to go down there, maybe just spend a week or a few days, you know, providing some medication or just even examining our people, because we want to demonstrate to the world that we are a people and we are fit to govern and to manage our own affairs. And that even in a situation like this, we have nurses, we have doctors, we have pharmacists who are prepared to come give a bit of their time, attend to these people whenever they are sick, in rotation. They come, do that, and go, come and do. That is part of us being together. As in the camp, what they sing in the camp, one for all for one. That's what they sing in the camp. And we must have to live by that as F.R.A.
Okay. Yeah, and also, those people in the camps, they need a lot of counseling. So it doesn't only need medical professionals.
Yes.
I mean, if you're a
counselors,
person,
yes, go there. Yes,
it's high time.
Yes.
You have your 1 week leave. You volunteer to go down to Nigeria. You sit down and you counsel those young people.
Yes, indeed.
This is one of the things that La Republic has caused our society not to have, as this counseling, which is very important after somebody goes through a traumatic, you know, incident or period. Like what we are going through, there's a lot of trauma right now, and those people who are displaced, their own trauma is even at another level, and they need a lot of counseling. So our messaging now, especially to those people who are displaced, those people who are injured, should be messages of reassurance.
Indeed.
You are giving them hope of, you know, of a brighter future.
Yes.
The sacrifices that they have paid are not going to go for nothing and all that. So so thank you so much, Prof, for talking to the refugee situation particularly. I know that our people have hit the call. I know that our people would answer this call clearly. We at Amba Perspective, we are really taking this refugee issue very seriously, and we are partnering with HSS to make sure that we push it within our communities, that our people help. And the president himself, he's taken it a personal issue. He will be launching a whole campaign in London while he will be visiting the UK for his talk at the London Political Summit. So there's this question that I wanted to ask you, Prof. La Republique used the Milner Simon in the Bakassi case against Nigeria, where they talked about boundaries. Is this something we can invoke as Ambazonians on getting them to return? We know that the AU statement said everybody return to your boundary as of independence. La Republique used that with Nigeria and Bakassi. Is that a card we can play?
The thing about the Bakassi judgment is many people should understand. It was a dispute between two countries over territory that did not belong to either of them.
Yeah.
And the ICJ decision, when you read it carefully, is simply saying this, that when you look at the treaty defining the boundaries, you find that Bakassi falls on that part of the boundary that has Cameroonness. Remember, there are two, and the people should, there are two terms that were invented during that case. Camerounité and Nigerianité. The English equivalent is to say the character of Cameroonness and the character of Nigerianness. And indeed, when you look at that boundary treaty, Bakassi fell on that side of the boundary that has the Cameroonness character. Now, that Cameroonness character does not distinguish between the southern Cameroon, former British Cameroon, and French Cameroon, whose border is more than 300-400 kilometers far down at the Mongo, away from Bakassi. So people should always remember that. The ICJ was not deciding that the boundary of French Cameroon is at Bakassi. No. If you look at it, you're talking about territorial dispute. That's what it was. The land boundary from the north and the territorial dispute over Bakassi. Yeah. And he said it has that character of Cameroonness. And I say this because look at the territory. If you read the case, it says that at the UN, during the UN plebiscite, the people of Bakassi, the plebiscite in the southern Cameroons, voted at the southern Cameroon. So, in other words, the Bakassi is in the United Nations Trust Territory of the southern Cameroons. Because it has the word Cameroon, and French Cameroon has Cameroon, so they just say it has the character of Cameroonness. In any event, when the International Court of Justice renders a decision, that decision is only valid, binding, as between the two countries concerned. No third state is concerned about that. So, assuming for the purposes of argument, but without considering the point that the Bakassi case decided that the boundary of French Cameroon is at the Bakassi, we are not bound by that decision. We could always challenge it at any time. So this little nuances, when you read some of these things, people should always bear it in mind. And that's why French Cameroon has not been able to mount any credible case to show that its boundary at any time shifted from around the Mungu to the Bakassi. Boundaries are not like ants that move. Boundaries are fixed. And if boundaries have to shift, it has to be, since they are fixed by treaty, they have to be also by treaty. And there is no treaty that I am aware of in terms of which the boundary of La République de Cameroon, as traced by the 7 million line, which is at the Mungu, changed and shifted to the Bakassi district. It hasn't.
Okay. Thank you for putting that clarification out, Prof. So really, I was asking if, in our case, right now, we can be pushing the Milner-Simon arrangement, you know, as of the boundary treaties.
Yes.
We can be pushing that as we go to courts, you know, in the coming months. We'll be pushing that.
If you look at the proclamation restoring the independence of the southern Cameroons, you'd find there's a provision there which outlines our boundary. It clearly states there. No, this boundary from this point to this point, this point to this point, including this Milner-Simon agreement, which was confirmed as between the Commissioner of French Cameroon and the Governor General of Nigeria in 1931, is there. So that is our boundary. And the beauty about all of this is that you can fool around with the boundary, but you can't fool around with the treaty. So when the time comes, you only need to do the tracing, and like they've done between Nigeria and French Cameroon up from Lake Chad, coming down. You remember they sent a UN commission that traced there and planted pillars and so on and so forth. So that's the beauty of it. When time comes, we assert it, and these UN official surveyors would come and plant those pillars right down to the Mungu and project it into our sea. So we know our territorial sea is very clear. The one on the side of the Bakassi Peninsula, the UN has already done, the ICJ already did that and projected into the sea at a tri-point where we share a common distance between Nigeria, Equatorial Guinea, and ourselves. On the day we get to Boya, we'll request the United Nations surveyors to come and also trace this right coming down there from Bui, coming down, you know, following that distance to the Mungu there and projecting it into the sea. So we have our territorial sea quite clear with all of that. That's part of international law.
So Prof, I cannot let you go without asking you to project in the future, so that we should be, whether our people should be hopeful or we should feel that it's doomsday that is coming. Why? Because I know that after the conclave, you spent, I think, 2 more days with the president, and I know that the two of you gentlemen were discussing the future of Ambazonia. And we have seen a draft constitution out there. We have seen a lot of shifts, different capitals at different locations. So I just want you to briefly, before we get to the top of the hour, give us a little snippet peek of this Ambazonia that you, our leaders, are planning to build. Tell us, Ambazonians, what we should expect and how that new Ambazonia would, you know, Tell us, give us a picture of that. I know I'm picking into what I shouldn't.
Our people must rest assured and remain vigilant and convinced that these dark days will soon be over. Then we'll go back to Boya, start rebuilding our lives, start rebuilding our country. And this rebuilding, I can tell you, we have ambition for our country, from Victoria to Nkambe. We've sat down, discussed this several times, look at our country, first on a constitutional level. Let me just clarify, there's some confusion in the air. Remember, we have proclaimed an interim government. Interim means provisional. It may last for 2-3 years, you know. What would the interim government be doing that time? Its mandate, first and foremost, after asserting control over our territory to Boya, is to ensure that we have a constitution for our new nation. That constitution is going to be debated, drafted by the Constituent Assembly that will be put in place. And I am appealing to all our people that we must send to that Constituent Assembly our brainiest people, our brightest people of all fields of human endeavor. Some people tend to think that it's for lawyers. No way. Law aspect has just a small little aspect of it like this. We have a lot of things that the Constituent Assembly have to decide. The Constitution, and that Constitution means they have to pronounce on the system of government that we need to have in Ambazonia. Shall it be parliamentary? Shall it be presidential? Semi-parliamentary? Semi-presidential? All kinds of things. So there's going to be robust debate within that Constitutional Assembly and being televised so our people can follow. This is something which we want to. Our people must be the architects of their own constitution, and they must follow all this debate and make their input, participate in drafting their own supreme law. So the kind of government we are going to have will be debated there and settled there. The structure of our state would have to be debated there. People have talked about a federal structure, 3 tiers or 2 tiers, 2 state or 3 state or 4 state or 6 state or 13 state, whatever, or 60, whatever. The good thing is that there are different models which we can borrow from. There's an American model, there's a British model, there's a Swiss model. Switzerland is in fact smaller than us. It has a confederation government and cantons, 2-tier. The Israeli government, the Israeli model, many other models which you can follow, you can look at. So the structure of the state will have to be decided by the Constituent Assembly. Even the names of our country. We are using Ambazonia or Ambaland as a provisional name. Let me assume the Constituent Assembly, they debate the issue about the name, and in its infinite wisdom, they said that we should call our country Cocoa Land. Who are we to refuse? Would accept it. They can even confirm that yes, Ambazonia is good. Who are we to refuse? We accept it. Some bright person may come with some new name, which is everybody just falls in love with it. We would accept it. And the same thing goes for our flag, the same thing goes for our national anthem, the same thing goes for our coat of arms, and so on. That is why I'm saying we cannot underestimate the importance of the Constituent Assembly. We cannot send to the Constituent Assembly people who are not going to be effective, people who don't think. Our most thinking people of all walks of life must be in that Constituent Assembly to debate all these issues, which is going to be televised, so our people can follow. Now, you've seen, we've put out a document inviting people to make comments and so on and so forth. All of this will constitute what we call preliminary works, travaux préparatoires. We'll get all of this and we hand over to the Constituent Assembly and say, while we're waiting to get to Boya, this is what we receive from our people. This person suggested this person suggested this, and so on. This is all the material, here it is. This we hope will help you in your deliberations as a Constituent Assembly. So that's to the future. But the the interim government, since we've put in place a government as of now, with the responsibility to take over our territory, control over our territory fully, and establish international contacts and so on, that government has to be guided by some document, some basic document. It's not a full-blown constitution as such, because the mandate of the interim government is extremely limited, and the structure is basic. We've seen the 7 ministerial portfolios. That is it, you know. So we are in the process of drafting that slender, slim, simple document, which will have an executive, president and the ministers. We'll have an ethics commission, something like, if you like, people like it to a judiciary, but it won't be a judiciary. And then the Restoration Council, acting more or less like a parliament, which is going to vet all the persons the president would appoint as his ministers and other persons. You have to vet them, you know, before approving. That basic document is in the process of being elaborated, and I don't think it should be anything more than maybe 10 pages at most and so on, few provisions, just to ensure that we have some basic rules that can guide the interim government as it moves forward. So we should not confuse these two documents, the one which the interim government is going to use some basic thing, and all the collection of ideas which we're having now, which we turn over to the Constituent Assembly to serve as material as it conducts its debate. Now, that is what is going to happen. But when we get to Boya, all of this, while this is going on, we have the ambition to give ourselves between 5 to 10 years to catch up to the rest of the civilized world in terms of development, in terms of everything. Our educational system, which we are elaborating now, we are benchmarking it with the best of the educational systems in the world you can see. We have the ambition also to have a network of roads and railways and airports and seaports and river ports in our territory to facilitate communication, the interaction between our people, businesses, and so on. So we dare to have the ambition to talk of a dual carriageway from Victoria right up to Nkambe, a railway system from Victoria right up to Nkambe. That is the kind of ambition we have for our people. Of course, this thing will depend, cost. You ask me, where is money going to come from? Everything is you have to try. You have to make sure that you find the money. So long as we set that thing, we set the rules, we set the admission, we shall endeavor to find the money for that purpose. So our people, we are going to make distances, reduce them like this. We don't need for somebody living in Kumba. Let me just take an example. Someone living in Kumba to work in Boya. You don't need even to go and live in Boya, because the road infrastructure will be so good. You drive, take you 30 minutes, you're in Boya. No call from work. Drive back to Kumba. You're at your home. No big deal. You're in Kumba to go to Manfe. Takes 1.5 hours at most. Or 1 hour to get to Kumba. You know? And the same thing to Bamenda and back and so on. So these are the ambitions we have. And I talked of the seaport. Our entry seaport will be in Victoria. The Victoria deep seaport will finally be constructed. And Victoria is going to be a hub for all our sea activities, and also for tourism and for pleasure and all of that, from Victoria right up to Idinau and projecting and going to Bakassi. We have this ambition. All our navigable rivers will become river ports. We are going to have airports. One airport will be in Tiko and one airport will have to be in Bamenda as our entry points. Those two airports, international airports. We have smaller airports. The reason for this is to facilitate communication, to facilitate businesses. People who want to go up to Nkambe within a few hours, transact business and so on, and come back to Victoria, they do it. They have a choice. You go by road, you go by rail, or you go by air. And we're giving ourselves this huge ambition to accomplish this task just within 10 short years of arrival in Buea. Allied to this are two critical things which I just want to mention. The first one is access to power. We all know without electricity, without power, this is our internet system and so we cannot even work. We can't even light up our cities. We can't light up our houses. Electricity is no longer a luxury. It is a necessity in this day and age. So we are going to exploit all avenues of getting electricity. Whether it be hydro, whether it be wind power, whether it be solar power, all of this. So that throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year, our people have access to electricity, and this adds to our development capability and capacities. And then, of course, water. We are in a water drainage area, the southern Cameroon. A lot of rivers and streams rise from there and they flow downwards. We are going to tap all of these to make sure that our people have water in addition to electricity. All our communities. And what we intend is to turn the development paradigm upside down. Development from the villages, rural areas, to the cities. Why do we want to do this? We do not want an influx into the city. Because in many countries, all the rural areas have been deserted, everybody running to a city, hoping to find good life. But if we develop the rural areas, they have water, they have electricity, they have administration there, they have businesses there, that mad rush to the city will not longer be attractive. And in any case, the rural areas will develop and become towns in their own, with their own systems of government. So we have very, very, very big ambition for our territory. Our people should simply just keep the faith and make sure we free our territory, we become decolonized, and things will begin to fall in place. All our people in the diaspora, at home, the place will be like an anthill where we'll be working. All expertise, all I say, all expertise, no expertise will be useless. And all of us will start working, building schools, building universities, building our hospitals, health centers, depending upon the policies which we would have developed for the development of our country. So my appeal is that we must remain focused as we stay in our different communities, these different ideas, developing them. Talk about water, how you can harness water. We have a lot of hydro engineers, water engineers around. Electricity, we have a lot of engineers around. Medical doctors who can tell us the kind of hospitals we need and so on. Pharmacists who can tell us, perhaps we go into generic drugs. We have forests, we have all kinds of plants. We can do things. We have the ambition to do all of these things. So for once, our people catch up with the rest of the world and our people become really free, politically, economically as well, and socially.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much for coming to the studios. Of course, we want to have you more. I always thought you have the history, but I didn't know that you have the vision for the future of Ambazonia. And I want us to have another session again as soon as you are free, where you will come and elaborate more on the future country that we are looking for. So thank you so much for coming.
It will be my pleasure,
yes.
Derek.
And once
Thank
again,
you.
viewers, this is Professor Carlson Anyangwe, and thank you. I will be going off now, but our spokesman for Africa and also Prophet Daniel and Walters Fondo will be coming up in a moment with briefings from our government. Thank you so much for watching SBC. Stay tuned.
Thanks.
Hold on. The guys will tell us.